Hey everybody, my name is Taylor Gibson, and this is the Gr8Wyte Experience. Hi everyone, welcome to the Gr8Wyte Experience, the show where I talk about anything and everything of interest. My name is Taylor Gibson. Thank you for listening. I hope everybody had a great and safe holidays and an even better New Year's. And it's hard to believe that the show has already reached 6 episodes and the first of hopefully many to come in 2022. Today's episode is going to tackle a subject that I know is polarizing to many people, but is beloved by the ones who enjoy it: professional wrestling, but more specifically, professional wrestlers from Canada. Joining me today is one half of the podcast, Bahdcast, and is also a pro wrestling fan. Please welcome to the show, Mike McFarlane, aka Mike the Bod. How are you, bud?
Thanks for having me, Bod. How's it going?
Pretty good, man. Pretty good. I'm super excited to have you on the program. Now, of course, this is the first time we've got a chance to work together.
Yeah.
Regardless of either podcast that I do. So I'm super excited. I know with being a listener to podcast, I know that you're into wrestling. And when I thought of this episode, I was like, that would be a good opportunity to work with Mike, because I haven't got a chance to work with him yet.
For sure, man. Yeah. Pro wrestling, something that goes back to like when I was a kid in the 80s and kind of going up. And I'm sure we'll talk about it, going through like the golden era, the golden age with Hogan and Macho Man and Andre the Giant and all that, to getting into the Attitude Era, which was just the peak of wrestling, in my opinion. But then falling out of love with it after that. But recently, in the last probably 5 years or so, I've reacquainted my love with it, not just with WWE, but with all the other promotions that are out there now, just because you have so much more access to this content than you did back in the day when people were trading VHS tapes.
Well, for sure. And nowadays, even with the arrival of All Elite Wrestling, it's great that we have another big promotion in North America.
Yep.
Much that isn't WWE, because other than that, you would have had Ring of Honor or TNA when that was at its peak. But other than that, you didn't have.
There was not much else out there other than you had your smaller indie promotions like CWL, I think CWL or CWC. That again, you would only hear about just because someone went to a show in like Kingston, Ontario, like just little random house, or not house shows, but little like indie shows like that.
Yeah.
But it's great now because you've got a company like All Elite Wrestling, who is the first serious contender since WCW, but has opened my eyes to all of these other promotions and all these other, like this different style of wrestling. That's not just big guy versus little guy. Like you could have one big guy and a little guy go at each other, and the little guy can kick the guy's ass. Like it's allowed me to kind of reimagine what pro wrestling is. And it's not in the, sorry for those that like WWE, like the more staged way in WWE, I guess is the best way to put it.
Yeah, the more scripted, more pre-rehearsed kind of deal. And I think even that's for myself why I like AEW, because it's pro wrestling. Of course, it's going to be predetermined and scripted, but you can tell there's a lot more freedom to it. You can tell that they're not as scripted. And when they cut a promo, they're not just so wooden and stiff when they say it. Yeah. They're actually speaking it from the heart. I know CM Punk's a perfect example of that right now in AEW. Now, before we get into talking about our favorite Canadian wrestlers, Mike, we got to do a little bit of housekeeping first. Now, usually when doing stuff like this with somebody I haven't worked with before, I like to do a little bit of getting to know them. And over the past couple of years, you've become known through your work with Taggart and Torrance, and have recently helped start up and become co-host of Bahdcast with good friend of the show, Neil Byrne.
Yeah.
For those who may not know the backstory, Mike, how did you become involved with both TNT and Bahdcast?
Oh, it goes back, I think, 9 years at this point. But right before the very first TNT podcast dropped, I guess the guys had recorded it. And Jeremy was on Twitter one afternoon and said, like, does anybody know how to get a podcast online? And I had known that they were going to be doing a podcast just from listening to Jay and Dan way back in the day when they were on TSN the first go round. So I was super excited about it. So I just randomly tweet back at him, was like, I can help you out. Like, I'll figure out how to do it for you. And just like I was a huge fan of OLP when I was a kid, or even now still, like just I'm like, I can help you out. That's basically all I said. And then he DM'd me. He's like, can I call you? I'm like, what the fuck? Jeremy Taggart wants to call me? So I give him my number and he calls me and he's just like, hey, really appreciate you wanting to help out. We go through the motions of like how this is all going to work. He's like, you're going to get to work with Tim from the Arkells, Tim
Good luck, sir.
And so we get everything coordinated. Tim sends me the file. I put it up on this random website that I had at the time. I don't even know what it was for now. And it was just a URL that everyone went to. Like that's basically how they released it. And then we worked together after that on like how to get them on SoundCloud, how to get them on iTunes and things like that. And then that just kind of progressed into me not just being like super interested in the content that they were producing, but wanting to help them. So I built them a website. I was bored one afternoon, bought the Taggart and Torrens domain, and then built a little website for them. And that kind of became like their little web home. And then I started their Facebook page. I started their Instagram page. They had already started on Twitter, started getting the content out more and more and more, and just kind of became like a little bit of a behind the scenes guy for them. And that's really all it's been since, which is kind of crazy. And it's been like 8 or 9 years that I still get to talk to the guys every week, that we're still doing the same thing. And it's still fun. Like there's no financial reward for me in any of this. It's really cool to work with two guys, that I really respect personally, having gotten to know them over the last few years. But two guys that I looked up to when I was a kid. Like one guy's an incredible musician. One guy's a crazy talented actor. And so to get to work with two people that you were really fond of growing up, and to build a friendship with them, and to be able to meet and experience a whole bunch of other things because of that friendship, it's been extremely rewarding and just really fun to do it. So that's how I got involved with TNT, and that's how I met Neil. Neil was a fan of TNT, much like I was and am, and as he still is. And I want to say we were probably part of like that initial little community that got built with TNT on Twitter. And there was this little group of us that were always talking about the show, especially when they had their radio show, like getting together online and basically doing listening parties and things like that. And that's how I got to know Neil. And over the years, we just started talking more and more through just like direct messaging, and knowing that we had a really tight affiliation with what TNT was and stuff like that, and just became really good friends. Got to meet him a few years ago when I went out to Saskatchewan to see TNT. And we've just been buddies ever since. So we thought it was just after the pandemic started, I think October of 2020. I messaged him one night and was just like, you ever want to do a podcast again? He's like, dude, I was thinking the exact same thing. And then we just said, okay, well, let's do it. No strings attached, no hassles, no pressure, no nothing. If it works, great. If we can't do an episode 1 week, no problem. If we can't do an episode for a few months, no problem. There's no pressure on any of us to make this bigger than what it can be. I think that's been the best thing. It's been great to get to know him on a more personal level because of the show. And I think for me, it's just given me another outlet to share ideas and to share my thoughts with another person. So it's been a blessing to be able to do it, and hope to continue to do it for as long as I can.
Well, I know for myself, because I'm a listener of Bahdcast, I've heard it right from the beginning. And obviously I knew Neil and when he was working with Dave for Maple Syrup.
Yeah.
But one of the things I wanted to ask Mike about your work with excuse me, Taggart Torrens, is that I know that they were doing a lot of live shows. Did you travel across the country with them?
No, I went to all their Toronto shows. So I used to live right downtown Toronto. It had their 100th episode at my condo, which was amazing.
Okay, you need to tell this story, because I know that some of the listeners listen to Bahdcast or Taggart Torrens story, but
yes.
Might tell that story.
So they were coming up on their 100th episode, and they hadn't figured out where or when they were going to do it yet. And I just floated a message out to Jared one day. I was just like, if you guys are strapped for a place to do it, I can rent the party room in my condo and we'll do it there. He's like, sold. We're doing it at your place. Like, we're not thinking about it. We're just going to do it. So me, him, and John will start coordinating. Like, we're going to get Swiss Chalet for everybody who's going to get the booze. We need to make sure that Tim can get in with all the sound equipment and all that. And that all the people that were being invited to it knew like the access code, how to get into my party room and all that sort of stuff. And so we get all that coordinated. We get the details out. I think we had something like 25 people there. We had like a table full of Swiss Chalet, ryes and diets and beers and all that stuff there. Mark Forward came, which was like mind blowing for me at the time. Like he walks up to, he buzzes my cell phone. He's just like, I'm here for Taggart and Torrens. I'm like, yeah, I'll be right there. And I walk up to my front door. I'm just like, holy shit, Mark Forward's here. So I open the door. I'm like, hey man, I'm Mike. He's like, hey, nice to meet you. Really mild mannered guy, super cool guy, but super chill. And I'll tell you a second story with him after. A couple of guys from the Flatliners came. They're guys that I got to know through working with Jared and Jono. So a few of them came. And yeah, we had a whole bunch of other buds. Wes was there. Sylvia, who has done work with Jonathan on Canadian Content Studios. She and her husband were there, who I realized her husband is best friends with Jared Kiso on Letterkenny, and he is Boots. Just so many little weird things have happened, but that was a very crazy night and a very fun night, and definitely one for the memory bank.
So basically what you're saying, Mike, is that can be summed up in one word: Canadianity.
Oh my fucking God, yeah. So good, man. So good. It was so much fun. It's those little experiences that I've been able to have, like, again, not going across Canada. Like, I've been to all the Toronto shows, went to a show in Saskatchewan with Dave, with Neil, and with Ricky. That was back in 2017 or 16. I went out east when the guys were filming their pilot for their TV show. So I got to see all that in action too, which was really cool. But yeah, and just, again, I think more than anything, they've just been so welcoming and appreciative of the work that I've been able to do for them. And it's like, we're all of the same understanding that this shit's just fun to do. And like, to have them just be so receptive to ideas that I give them, and for them just being so appreciative of the work that I've done for them, it's been great working with them, man.
Yeah, it's awesome. And I know even for myself, like when they came out to Vancouver Island a couple of years ago, they did 2 shows, one in Victoria, one in Nanaimo, and I booked both days off to go see them. And nice. Yeah, that was the one thing, because I took both my dad and my mom to both shows. And you got to understand, like, my dad knows about Our Lady Peace and knows who, obviously, Jonathan Torrens is through Trailer Boys. But my mom was watching them, and even she was having a good laugh, and she doesn't know either one of them. She's like, well, it's just kind of funny. She enjoyed it. So that's awesome.
But my dad gets a kick out of the fact that I know the guy who played J-Rock. Because and my dad's my dad's a 70-year-old retired realtor who is obsessed with Trailer Park Boys, like absolutely obsessed with it. And he's just like, I can't believe you know J-Rock. That's so cool.
That is really awesome. That is really awesome. Now, another thing we got to touch on here a bit, and again, we're never going to do stuff like this. I always like hearing about how a said person becomes a fan of a certain team, or how they come to write for their blog or record a podcast. Now, I don't think we've touched on this yet on this episode. I know you touched on it a little bit with Bahdcast, but I'd like to know, Mike, how did you get into professional wrestling?
Ooh, I was definitely a kid. I think it was just one of those things I was interested in just from seeing it on TV more than anything. We were also, I don't know what year you were born. I was born in 82.
92.
Yeah, like I was a Hasbro kid. So Hasbro would make like every toy and then make the cartoon. So you see the cartoon, then you have to buy the toy. So you see some wrestling cartoons, and wrestling toys back then were fucking awesome. And sorry if I don't know if we can swear on this podcast.
Oh, you're all good, Mike.
Oh, good. but like the toys were great. You get the fake, you get the ring, you get the bendable wrestlers, you get like the really heavy rubber guys from like the early 80s.
Oh, I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah. My brother had a whole box of those when we were growing up.
If you hit someone in the head with them, you would knock them out. Like they were just so thick and heavy. But I think it was that, like, so it was probably because of TV, but it was something I always watched. Like watching like Saturday Night Main Event was incredible. The early days of Monday Night Raw was great. WWF Superstars, all the early stuff from like not the early, but all the stuff from like the late 80s to early 90s was when I really got into it. But you may go here, but my escalation into it was definitely the Attitude Era, like 95, 6.
Yeah, I know for myself, because I mean, I was born in 92. So when I got into wrestling in the late 90s, it was definitely the Attitude Era with the Stone Colds and Triple H's and then NWO and all that stuff. And I know even for myself, because I got 2 older brothers, and of course, being the youngest brother, they thought, I got an idea. Let's put Taylor in a lot of wrestling holds when we were growing up. And I know we'll talk about this with one of our wrestlers here, but one of the things was, I remember I was playing video games in the basement. I can't remember, it was my oldest brother, second oldest, walked in. He looked at the other one, was like, watch this. And he puts me in a sharpshooter. And I had tried to get out of it.
I think every Canadian kid has got put it in the sharpshooter or given someone the sharpshooter at least once. Like you had to have. Like it's the iconic Canadian wrestling move, in my opinion.
Oh, 100%. I mean, between that and getting power bombed onto the couch as a little kid is just the worst, because the one time my brother did it. Now, keep in mind, I was a good sized kid when I was growing up. So my brother picked me up, got me up in the air. Well, I'm squirming, trying to get loose. So he drops me. He doesn't hit the couch. He kind of hits the middle part of that couch.
Oh, I know what you mean.
That in the floor, and it goes whap. And I was like, oh God.
Damn it, man.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, wrestling moves on the couches or beds, wrestling moves into pools, like giving someone like like flipping someone backwards, you give someone a DDT into the pool or power bombing someone into the pool. All the things I did as a kid, all of them.
What do you mean as a kid? We still do them to now. Let's be honest.
Well, I do have a pool in my backyard here, but I don't think it's deep enough for any wrestling moves.
Yeah, that's heartbreaking, Mike. That's heartbreaking. So throughout pro wrestling's history, and there are certain countries who have really made a significant importance in the sport, whether it be Mexico for their high flying luchador style, Japan obviously for the different death matches and hardcore wrestling. Canada seems to be a country that has always been very well respected in professional wrestling, with the countless wrestlers it's produced over the years, and as well as the important figures out of the ring, like Stu Hart, for example. And I know we'll talk about this more when we get to our list, but I mean, Canada has just produced so many wrestlers, from Chris Jericho to Kenny Omega to even Trish Stratus. Now, for yourself, Mike, I'd like to know, as a wrestler, like, how much impact do you think Canada has had in the world of professional wrestling?
Oh, I would think a ton.
Yep.
You got you think this year alone, you've got one like Christian Cage / Christian, whatever we're calling him, who main evented 2 pay-per-views, or last year main evented 2 pay-per-views in 2 different promotions, age of like 45, 46. You have Edge coming back to like tremendous pop and storyline and getting that build there. You got Kenny Omega, who is obviously probably the best wrestler in the world, if not one of the best wrestlers in the world. So you think of that even just in the last 10 years, the impact. And Chris Jericho, who's kind of just ascended from being this WWE guy to going to New Japan, to being this indie guy, to coming to AEW, and like being all these different flavors of Jericho. Like it's these guys are still in their prime at this age. They've been in the business for so long, and they're still main eventing in major promotions. You got to think that, like, even just in the last little while, Canada's played a major role in the shape of a lot of different wrestling promotions.
100%. I know, even for myself, like when I think of Canadian wrestlers, the one thing that really pops to mind for me is that if you grew up watching the WWE, regardless of whatever era, whether it be Hogan or the Attitude Era, or even nowadays with like the Cena's, Batista's, is that Canada produces top tier wrestlers that aren't the biggest guys in the world. When you really think about it, like they're not and I'm not going to say like we're not producing champs, obviously from Jericho, Kenny Omega, Bret Hart, whatever you want to say, but you're looking at wrestlers who, again, are not 6'7", 280. We're producing guys who are 6'2", 6'3", more midweight kind of, but it's more about agility, speed. It's all about not power moves. It's more about what can you do in the ring and make it.
It's not the old school Vince McMahon mantra of like David versus Goliath and like these big giants working and like combating against each other. I would say Canada produces like when you like wrestlers that when you look at them, it's like that guy, I know what he's doing is scripted, but I think could be very real. Bret Hart, the perfect example. Like, I believed every single thing Bret Hart ever said because it's just like he lived and breathed pro wrestling. Like, he wasn't a gimmick. That was him. Like, and you start to see other wrestlers start to pick up on that. Like guys like CM Punk are very much like Bret Hart. Guys like Bryan Danielson are very much like Bret Hart. Kenny Omega. Like, you don't have to be this giant guy. And this is going to sound super cliche in the wrestling community, but it's like all of these people tell stories in the ring. And when I say tell stories, not like they're saying their words, it's literally from like starting a match to like building it up and building it up and building it up and having a hero versus villain and it going back and forth and then ending that match. And people are just like, holy shit, that was a ride. There's something about Canadian wrestlers that they can do that better than anybody else, and I don't know why it is.
It's true. I think for myself, and even talking about that, is that I don't know, a lot of people would agree. I think Kenny Omega had one of the best matches AEW put on last year in the first match with Bryan Danielson in New York.
Oh God, yeah. That pop at the beginning of the show, yep. The stare down that they were having where Danielson's like laughing and like Omega, you can tell is like holding back a smile. Like, this is the coolest shit in the world. It gives me goosebumps when I think of that match. I don't know why. It was so fucking good. And it was on free TV. It was on free TV.
I tweeted that out, Mike. I was just like, this is a pay-per-view match and we got it for free.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
Like tomorrow night, and I don't know when you're going to drop this, but we're doing this on a Tuesday night. Tomorrow night, we're getting Danielson and Page 2 for free on TV.
Yeah.
Like, what the fuck, man? It's just like
you have to go back to the Attitude Era, man, to get stuff like this.
This is honestly like, and that's why I'm so giddy about it. Like literally when I was 16, 17 years old, like I lived and breathed pro wrestling. Like Monday Night Raw, SmackDown, ECW, Nitro, Thunder, you named it. Heat, I watched it. I got to go to see Raw when they went to the Sky Dome in Toronto when they had 55,000 people there. It was just a different feeling, and that feeling is back for me now. And I'm a 40-year-old man. Like that's crazy. Like, and I'm giddy about pro wrestling again. That's how cool that shit is to me.
And I think that's why people who don't like wrestling can't really understand why it is that people like ourselves, like we get so giddy when we see a good match or we see a great promo. And it's like, yeah, I know that's not real. And yeah, that's predetermined, but it was great. It was great for what it was.
Yes. Like it's, I don't want like everyone I think still calls wrestling like the male soap opera or whatever you want to call it. But I think, but that's what you want from good content. You want it to pull you in. You want to believe in what's happening, and you want to leave thinking like, shit, that was really good. It's like I would go see shows like Wicked or The Lion King, like see these shows in downtown Toronto at like the Mirvish theaters and things like that. And like, I believe that thinking like, holy shit, that was incredible. Like I could see that over, like the performances were amazing. Everything felt real. It was great. Like it's not that different with pro wrestling.
No.
And I think, and you hit on like the Attitude Era kind of feeling like it's back right now, which I think it is, because you've got promotions like AEW, GCW, JCW, you've got ROH on, which is really sad. That's probably a whole other topic.
Yep.
But you've got all these alternatives now. And a lot of these alternatives are bringing that realism back. That was the main of the Attitude Era. Like NWO, you felt was real. Like when you got Razor Ramon and Diesel invading WCW, it's just like, holy shit, what the hell is happening? This doesn't happen,
right?
Or Medusa dumping the women's WWF title into a trash can on TV. It's just like, this shit doesn't happen. That stuff's happening again now because you've got guys from New Japan coming to AEW. You've got guys from AEW running over to GCW. You've got all of these guys just intermingling, and it's like, this works. It's not just this WWE universe where you have superstars and all of that. It's like wrestlers can be themselves, which brings a lot more realism to it, which brings that element of the Attitude Era back to what I think wrestling really needed.
Now, one final question before we head off into the break here, Mike. And you did mention that you saw, I believe it was Raw in the Sky Dome. Did you happen to see WrestleMania 18 when it was in Sky Dome? No,
I didn't. Well, I saw it on TV. I wasn't there.
Yeah. Have you ever met anybody who ever went to 18?
No. That was Rock Hogan, right?
Yes.
Yeah. No. Like when I think of like my group of friends that are and were into wrestling back then, it would have been one guy. I don't think he went. But I can vividly remember watching it. Like NWO Hogan versus Rock is like, I don't care how, like, Hogan's a piece of shit for a lot of different reasons. That was a crazy good match.
Like I was rewatching just the opening of that match when Rock is doing this whole thing, and then the lights come up, and the crowd just starts chanting for Hogan, and they're looking at each other like, "Wait, I thought they're cheering for Rock, but they're cheering for me. What's going on here?"
Yep. Well, that's like, did they actually do the double? They didn't do like a proper double turn that night, though. They just played to the crowd, like as Hogan being the face and Rock being the heel.
I think for that match, I think they did. Yeah, if I'm not mistaken.
It will never ever beat the Bret Hart Austin switcheroo.
No,
from I think that was Survivor or SummerSlam or Survivor
13.
Series.
WrestleMania 13.
Fuck, that was good. And execute, like, that's why Bret Hart is so fucking good.
It's good, Mike. It is good. So, Mike, we're going to take a really quick break, and we are going to come back, and we are going to talk about our favorite Canadian professional wrestlers. Coming right back. All right, we are back. Now, Mike, since this is your first time here on the Gr8Wyte Experience, and we've got a number of wrestlers we're going to do. So for this segment, we're not going to really go like 1 to 5. We're going to have a bunch of wrestlers, kind of like a roundtable discussion. And we're going to start with your number one choice here, Mike. Who do you have to kick off our list?
Bret Hart.
See, you and I have Bret Hart at number one. I mean, that's an obvious choice.
He is the best there is, the best there was, the best there ever will be. Like, best technical wrestler, best storytelling wrestler. Maybe not the best promo guy, but a really impassioned promo guy. Could do tag team, could solo, like just, and to your point earlier, not the biggest guy. Like, he wasn't a 6'7" giant. He was like a 6'1", 210, 215 pound lean guy. But just, you could put him in the ring with anybody, and how bad that other person was, he would make them look good. The only person he was not able to do that to, unfortunately, which is the cause of his career ending early, was Goldberg.
Yeah, but I mean, Goldberg was so green in the ring, though. That's the only problem. Because, I mean, look at all the people who had to make Goldberg look good because he was so green in the ring. And you're right. I mean, with what happened with Bret Hart, and he still holds a grudge. And I think that's the one thing I always notice about Bret, even post-career. You can tell there's still, I don't know, there's still a ton of anger there, but he definitely holds a grudge. He holds a grudge big time against a lot of people.
I kind of alluded to this earlier. I think he thinks this is all real. And I'm not saying that like he's not crazy or anything like that. He very much believes in his character and in the work that his character can do. I don't think he's ever had a problem losing to someone. He'll lose to someone if it makes the most sense for the story and if it doesn't completely bastardize his character. which like no loss ever really did. It was just the with Goldberg was unfortunate, man, because I think you could have got him wrestling guys like potentially Danielson or Punk. Like it could have happened.
Or even if a couple of years later when WWE bought out WCW, he could have come back and had a great match with Kurt Angle.
Reignited the whole issue with Shawn Michaels. Like, it's such a shame that his career ended the way that it did. But man, when he was on, like he's incredible. Like literally incredible. So good at what he does.
He is. And I mean, you look at a number of the guys that he wrestled and the amount of classic matches that he had. And one of the things that I really noticed, I don't know if I'm talking out of my ass or you would kind of agree with me here on this, Mike, is that during the new generation of the WWE of the mid 1990s, one thing a lot of people don't seem to really remember fondly is WrestleManias. There's certain matches people seem to remember, but it seems like the classic matches that people remember from that era was Bret versus Owen at WrestleMania 10, the 60-man match at 12 with HBK, him and Stone Cold at 13. I mean, those are some of the most classic WrestleMania matches, and I think 12 was the only one that he ever headlined.
The only thing I can think of from that is it was like that in-betweeny era between Attitude and the Golden Age, where there were these transitions starting to happen, where Bret was becoming champion. Guys like Shawn Michaels were coming up, not being just a tag team guy. From what I can remember at the time, like even just like society was kind of changing in terms of like everyone wanted babyface content in general, to guys like Springer becoming like the number one TV show in the country, and Raw being like, you get your men wrestling and you get your TNA, and maybe you'll get someone flipping off somebody and someone may say shit on live TV. Like that, it just kind of all started to pop then. So it's not to say that those matches back then weren't good. They're incredible. It's just, I don't know if I think there was like a viewership lull or transition that was starting to happen at that point, because I certainly don't remember them. Like, and I grew up during that time, like when I was a diehard fan, and I'm not like, when I think of WrestleMania, my WrestleMania moment started like WrestleMania 17, which was the 3-way TLC match between the Hardys, the Dudleys, and Edge and Christian.
Yeah, near and dear to my heart. I mean, that spot where Jeff's hanging off from the belt and Edge speared him off the ladder, I was just like, how did you not kill yourself doing this?
So one of the things me and my buddies in high school did was one of my buddies would order the pay-per-view every month, and we would all go to his house on a Sunday. We'd all bring like pizzas, or like we would all go to Subway or bring a shit ton of food, pay our buddy $10, and we'd all just chill out for 3 hours or 3.5 hours and watch every pay-per-view. So all like the In Your House, the Summer Slams, when they started doing the more named pay-per-views with like Judgment Day and Bad Blood and stuff like that. I can remember like 10 of us sitting there watching that happen and like it just was silent. Like we just all witnessed a murder. Like he's dead. That's why I love pro wrestling, man.
I know. And it's such a different spot than when Undertaker threw Mankind off the cage, because Jim Ross didn't even know about that. He sees him falling onto the table. He's like, good God Almighty.
He's dead. Which, like, fuck. I watched that live. Like, I watched that pay-per-view live. Same reaction. Just like, that's when wrestling was changing. And I don't think people give ECW enough credit for what was happening there. And I only say this because I hear it so often from all the different WWE wrestlers in that era. Vince McMahon would get so pissed that every town he would go to, people would be chanting ECW. He's like, who is this little fucking promotion in Philadelphia where I'm going to like Chicago, or I'm going to Atlanta. I'm going to these key cities where they're the king, and people in the crowd are chanting ECW. Like, what the fuck? Like, it just, and that's where I think like he started to pay attention to that product, which I think is what ushered in the Attitude Era alongside WCW with the NWO and all that too.
Now, when it comes to Bret Hart, one of the big things that really comes to mind when I think of Bret, his usage of black and pink. That is such, you got to think of a look, because when he was debuting in the 80s, everything was neon colors and big bright colors. And here comes Bret Hart, because I think he was wearing pink at the just straight pink. And then he incorporated black with pink. And that is such a sleek, modern, and yet there's a weird futuristic look to it. It's so eye-popping, right?
And you think that he carried that look from the 80s to the late 90s.
Yep.
Like, that's pretty significant. And like today, if he were to come out, like when he came out and introduced the AEW World Championship, he still has like elements of pink and black and everything he wears. And it's like, it's timeless. Like his glasses, like the reflective pink glasses that he used to give all the kids and stuff like that. Like when you think pink and black, you think Bret Hart. Like you just do.
Yeah. And of course that's been carried over with Natty Neidhart too, right? In WWE.
Yep. Yeah, no, Natty. I think like I feel like she entered, or she came up in pro wrestling like 10 years too early. She's such an incredible wrestler. Like she's like Bret. She's like her dad, Jim, that she came up when women's wrestling was like the Divas era. Like you have the Diva Championship, and it wasn't about women who knew actually how to put on a match. It was more about like, let's get really hot women together and maybe something will fall off, or like, it's just not a good match. Natty is an incredible wrestler, incredible technical wrestler. I think a great storyteller. She just came up in an era that didn't really appreciate that. Whereas if you look at women's wrestling now, especially in the WWE, they get main events at WrestleManias. They get main events on pay-per-views, on Raws, on SmackDowns. It's a whole different ball game now. So it's, I wish she had a better I wish she could have had her opportunity that she had back then right now. Cause I think everyone would be super impressed by what she can do.
We got to talk about Bret Hart's feud with Shawn Michaels, because you got to think that is the number one feud that when you really watch it, that very much blurred the lines of, okay, how much of this is real and how much of this is scripted, because you have two guys polar opposites of each other in the ring and out of it, and yet two of the best wrestlers in the company, and here you have this natural hatred between the two.
Yep. The whole like got the sunny days comment. That was right at the time when they were, that I actually have that as one of my own notes here. The Hart Foundation in 95 and 96 was one of the best stables in professional wrestling ever. Like they were the ones that were going against DX, and DX was like really trying to come up with Triple H and with China, and the Hart Foundation were the heels because they were like anti-American and America's changing and all this. We want all this back. And I think, again, it goes back to Bret and even to Shawn to some extent. They just believed what they were saying. And when you give the wrestlers the opportunity to, like, I don't know if they had creative freedom. I don't know if they, or what, it certainly felt like it, because that's what you get in like promotions like AEW now. Like it's still the predetermined outcome, but the wrestlers all really seem to give a shit about what they're doing. They seem to give a shit about what they're saying. That's what you got with Bret and Shawn. Like Shawn was kind of the arrogant asshole, problem with drugs. Bret, I don't think he had any medical or drug problems or anything like that, but he was like the utmost professional and like believed in like old school kayfabe and like all of this. And like they were just meant to clash, and it worked perfectly.
Well, their match at WrestleMania 12, I mean, and I was alluding to this earlier when talking about the classic matches from the new generation, is that the 60-man Iron Man match, that's a match that people don't realize how hard that really is.
Oh my God.
To do, but to keep people's attention for that long. Can you imagine in 2022, somebody in whether AEW, WWE, whoever, trying to do a 60-man Iron Man match on a pay-per-view, and that's the main event?
Danielson and Page did it on Dynamite 2 weeks ago. But again, you don't see companies do that because there's only so many wrestlers in the world that I think could actually do that. Bret Hart and Shawn Michaels being two of them there. Kenny Omega could, Okada could, Jericho could, but I don't think he could go like he used to be able to go.
No, in his prime, maybe.
In his prime, he could do it. Like it's like you got to have the gas to do it, but that's where the storytelling comes in, because like you said, you've got to keep people's attention for a whole hour. Like that's draining for a crowd to watch. If you're really invested in it, it's like people should, after that match, feel like, okay, I'm done. I'm ready to go home. Like, and there's only so few people in the world that can actually do that.
Yeah, well, I know, even going back to what we were saying about the Omega Danielson match from earlier last year, that's a match like that was what, half an hour, 20-minute match. And even that match, I turned it off. I was just like, I'm done. I can't go anymore.
I don't need to go anymore. That was perfect. Like it turns into that scenario where it's like, I just watched the perfect match.
Yep. And then CM Punk comes out, and the first word out of his mouth was, "Thank God I'm not wrestling tonight, eh?"
Yeah.
They could have hit credits right there. The episode could have been over. I would have been happy.
Just, yeah. Like, and that's, be it Iron Man matches, be it like dream matches, things like that. Like that's, I think, as wrestling fans, what we live for. And that's like when you can see guys go and really buy into like the story, and like as much as the crowd is, it's, I don't know, it's enticing, man. That's what keeps me glued to it.
And well, unfortunately, we never got that rematch of HBK Bret Hart at WrestleMania 13. We did get another feud, and that was Bret Hart's with Stone Cold. And you got to think about, because this is definitely one of those feuds where when I first got into wrestling as a little kid, like I was a big Stone Cold guy, because there was just nothing like this guy on TV. But I think people tend to forget that Bret, his feud with Stone Cold, it really did help put Steve Austin over in a big
100%. They did the perfect turn. They literally, Bret Hart went from a face to a heel, and Stone Cold went from a heel to face in one match, and that carried over. Like that, no other wrestler could have done that for Austin. And like this was like, this is prime Austin too. Like Austin before his knee injuries and his neck injury and stuff like that was a crazy fucking good wrestler, like good technical professional wrestler. So his match with Bret was inherently, you just knew it was going to be good. And they both trusted each other. And like, was that the match with all the blood on Austin's face? Like that image. And again, that match where they both turned on each other. That's what elevated Austin.
It was. Like, and for me, I get very sentimental when I think about that match in general, just because, again, that was the very first match from start to finish that I watched, because I'm a little kid. I don't have much of an attention span, but when I watched it from start to finish, and the two spots that really stuck out for me was, I believe Steve had Bret in the ropes and he's choking him out with the extension cord, and Bret hits him with the bell. But also, of course, when Steve's in the sharpshooter, he pushes up, tries to break out of it, and just the blood gushing out of his face. And it's funny because years later, I was listening to Steve Austin podcast when he was talking about first time he saw Dusty Rhodes. Same thing. Dusty Rhodes is in the ring, getting the shit beaten out of him. He's cut open. He asked his mom, why are they jumping in to help him? And I got super sentimental, because that was my thought when I first saw that. I said to my dad, why are they not jumping into the ring to help him? Like, and of course, how big do you think that would have been? Because nobody could break out of the sharpshooter. If Steve Austin had broken out of that sharpshooter, how much more do you think that could have gotten Steve over?
Oh, it definitely would have. I think it got him more over by passing out.
Yep.
That's the better story. And like, it's the same thing with what happened with Paige and Danielson a couple of weeks ago on Dynamite. They went to an hour, and then like there was time limit. Like that's perfect. Like you keep both guys are still over. They both go over in the match because you got Paige getting cut. Danielson's acting more heelish than ever. But it's the same back with Austin and Bret. Like I don't know if they were planning on the double turn that night.
No,
or if they just called it
on anything like that.
They called it. They probably just called it in the match and this said this is happening. you don't get like, you're getting more wrestling like that nowadays like that. But like, again, that's probably one of the most perfect matches ever.
It is. Now, the last thing, unfortunately, we need to talk about, Mike, when talking about Bret Hart.
Yeah.
The Montreal Screwjob.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know what I could really add to this because, again, the Montreal Screwjob has been one of these moments in wrestling that has just been beaten into the ground so much. There's been Dark Side of the Ring did an episode on it. Wrestling YouTubers done the wrestling episodes on it. It's like, what more can you really get out of it?
Yeah. No, I think we all know the story by now. It's Bret was leaving the WC, or Bret was going to stay with WWF because he was going to get a shit ton of money. Vince pulled back on it and said, you can go and get your deal from WCW. So he gets this deal from WCW. Vince gets scared that Bret will take the belt with him because of what happened with Alundra Blaze, dropping the belt into the garbage can on Nitro. So he wants Bret to lose the belt to Shawn Michaels, who we were just talking about, not just like storyline arch enemy, but like real life arch enemy. Wants him to drop the belt in Montreal at Survivor Series, which Bret's like, no, I'm not losing it to Shawn. I'm not losing it into my home country. I'll lose it the next night. I think they were in Ottawa the next night. Do something then. But like, that's how much he hated Shawn or didn't trust Shawn. And then obviously Vince didn't trust him and yada, yada, yada. Shawn puts Bret in the sharpshooter. Earl Hebner calls it immediately. And then the rest is history.
Which is one of the worst looking sharpshooters I've ever seen. Because I think Bret's even says in interviews that Shawn put his wrong leg in first, and he's looking up at him going, no, like the other leg's got to go in first, and then you turn me around.
Oh, yeah, it's one of those stories. Like it's such an iconic story now. It's been reviewed so many times. It was kind of like that was when kayfabe and wrestling kind of died. I think that's when like the business was exposed, as Jim Cornette would say. But that's what made Mr. McMahon. He went on Raw the next night with a black guy and say Bret screwed Bret. Like, holy shit, this guy's got balls the size of a fucking gorilla. Like, but that's what ushered in the Attitude Era. It's crazy.
So I'm going to move on to our second wrestler here, Mike. And this guy here, I'm putting him on the list despite the fact of how little of his work I've really seen. Kenny Omega. I really didn't see any of his Bullet Club stuff. His matches in New Japan. Outside of his match with Bryan Danielson, I have to admit, like, I think his matches have been good, not great.
So I had Kenny. Kenny was my number 2 as well. I've watched a ton of his New Japan stuff. Prime Kenny Omega is like 2016 to 2018. Like when he's facing Okada, when he's facing who else was he facing back then? I can't remember. He was partnering with Kota Ibushi and like the Golden Lovers and Bullet Club and all of that. He's like Bret Hart. He's an incredible technical, tactical storytelling wrestler. He's had glimpses of it in AEW too. I think his little sabbatical that he's on right now, or not sabbatical, he's getting surgery, but his time off now he needs, like, this guy does stuff that he doesn't need to do. Like that's part of what makes him wild. But he's probably the best wrestler I've seen in the last 20 years. Yeah,
and even with some of the stuff that I have seen him in New Japan, like you can tell this guy is so talented in the matches. And of course, I mean, Dave Meltzer, the match with Okada, he gave a 6 out of 5.
Yeah.
How many matches get that? A 6 out of 5 rating from Dave Meltzer?
Not a lot, but I think he's had multiple matches that have been 5-star or even 7-star. Yeah. It's crazy. Like that's how good he is. Like he does the crazy shit and the crazy bumps that he probably shouldn't do. He's fast, he's big, he's athletic, he's agile, and he looks like a video gamer, or he looks like a video game enemy. Like he's awesome. Absolutely amazing.
Now, of course, the first time I ever heard of Kenny Omega was on TSN's Engraved on a Nation. And this is the first time that I really ever saw what he was doing in New Japan. And I gotta admit, that was one of those really good episodes on Engraved in Nation that TSN done. I don't think they do them anymore as far as I know. I'm sure you might talk.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I have no idea. And I remember that episode. I haven't seen it. I do need to watch it. But that was right around, like, was that when right around when he was about to face Moxley in AEW?
No, AEW wasn't around yet. It was like,
okay,
it was the pay-per-views that Cody Rhodes put on because
All In.
All In.
Yeah.
Or was it? No, it was at Madison Square Garden, wasn't it?
That was ROH did Madison Square Garden. Cody put on All In. Cody and the Bucks put on All In.
Okay, that was the one I'm thinking of. And yeah, it was a great episode. Now we got to talk a little bit about his role behind the scenes in AEW, and we've talked about this to death. I mean, the importance in just giving the fans a serious alternative to WWE. I think that's more, of course, attributed to Cody Rhodes and the Young Bucks. But I want to talk a bit about his work with AEW because this is where I've really begun to notice him. And one thing I've really noticed, I really like him as a heel. I think he's a very engaging heel. It's just funny because his baby works, like his face stuff, just it's hit and miss.
He's such a good dick. Like that's like he plays a really good asshole, and he backs it up. Like that's the most believable thing about all of it with him. The face stuff, it's fine.
Yeah,
he's a way better heel than he is a face. And but he's kind of one of those tweeners where people will still cheer him. Like I would still cheer him if I saw him. Like I don't think of him as a bad guy, like as a heel, not like an MJF. Like an MJF is like,
that guy is incredible.
He's the heel.
Yeah.
Kenny Omega's a heel, but he's like an NWO heel where he's over. Like that's how I think of Kenny Omega. That's how I think of the Elite and like Super Click and stuff like that too. It's like DX and NWO back in the day. And like it was cool to like them even though they were the bad guys.
Or even now with Bullet Club.
Or exactly.
Yeah. Well, it's funny, like just how big Bullet Club has really gotten over the last several years, not just because of the internet, but just because back in the day with like DX and NWO, you had it on TV. It was very mainlined of how this product is being presented.
Yeah.
I have to wonder if that was the way it is today. I wonder how much more over Bullet Club could have been just for the general public, like the NWO.
I mean, I don't know. Like, I think Bullet Club, a few things helped them. The Young Bucks were, I think, the best thing, like from a financial standpoint, were the best thing that ever happened to Bullet Club because they basically got them in Hot Topic. And that's where you got all the North American kids wearing Bullet Club t-shirts, and like everyone knew what Bullet Club was. It was like the New Japan version of NWO, and it was all the best wrestlers in the world, and everyone wanted to be in Bullet Club. And like the best wrestlers were coming over to WWE from Bullet Club, and like so like you knew it was like valid, like an NWO or a DX. It would be crazy to see what a Bullet Club, like a brand new Bullet Club, would be like right now. I don't know what it would be like. I just think it still carries a lot of name, which is good. But Bullet Club 2015, 2016 was pretty awesome.
Well, I know for myself, because I bought a Bullet Club shirt a few years ago, and most of the people who see it, they don't think it's a wrestling shirt. They think it's like a gun club or something. I had a guy in Walmart come up to me and he goes, "Bullet Club, are you like a part of a gun club or something? That's such a cool shirt." And I'm looking at it like, no, this is a Japanese wrestling shirt.
I got a Kenny the Cleaner Bullet Club shirt. And
I did look at one of those. Those are cool. I will.
And I don't know how many people I had a Young Bucks one too. I don't know how many people when I lived downtown Toronto, if I was walking on the street, would give me the wolf packs. And it's just like, yep, we look like it's, what's up. Yeah, exactly. Just from a shirt. But like and that's pretty awesome for something like Bullet Club, which wasn't competing in North America at the time. Like, you had they were competing in ROH. But that was ROH. This wasn't TNA. This wasn't, or Impact. This wasn't WWE. It was still a really small indie promotion, still getting super over with everybody. And like, it's like, I don't know, just if they just had a much more bigger North American spotlight, like if Bullet Club started in AEW, holy shit, like probably 10 times bigger than what it is right now.
So let's talk about the third wrestler I have on the list. And I know for a lot of people, this one's going to put a real bad taste in a lot of people's mouth. It's Chris Benoit. Yep. And I'm putting him on this list strictly for one quote that came from Paul Heyman years ago. And I think Paul Heyman put it best. He says, you can admire Chris's work while acknowledging the atrocities that he committed.
Yes. There's nothing good about what he did. Absolutely. He was a good wrestler. It was great. He was a great professional wrestler. And it's sad what happened. Really, really sad what happened for his family. But man, you wish someone like that who had that much talent could obviously remain healthy and not do what he did. And yeah, he was definitely definitely a very polarizing figure for quite a while.
Yeah, I mean, and I think the polarization of Chris Benoit is still around today, even 15 years after the fact. But I think a few things have really changed that. And obviously with his murder-suicide in 2007, I think it obviously gave wrestling a really huge black eye. I don't think it really ever has recovered from. But
no,
one of the things that it really shined light on, and it was something that was always linked to football, was CTE. Because after he died, they examined his brain and they looked at it. He says, this guy's got a brain of an 80-year-old Alzheimer's patient.
Yep.
And Chris was what, 40 at the time when he died?
Maybe.
Yeah.
Wasn't that old. But yeah, like 40 is not that old. But he was a young guy.
He was. And it's really a shame because, again, it goes to show just how far it's come, because back then everything was linked to steroids and roid rage and all that stuff. But now with CTE, they're looking at it and being like, okay, well, it's because of what was going on with his brain. And you saw it in the NFL with some of the guys from the Pittsburgh Steelers, Aaron Hernandez. You saw it with him after he died. But going just strictly him as a wrestler, and he wasn't a guy I watched a ton growing up. I knew who Chris Benoit was, but later in life when I got back into it, I did watch some of his work, and it's still difficult watching, especially the flying headbutt he did after years and years of knowing what happened. It's just like, oh,
not the best finishing move, which is probably why you don't see it anymore. Like you don't see it anymore. You see headbutts here and there, like the little protected headbutts and stuff like that. But it's a shame that it took something like that to shine a light on it. But I'm glad that a company like the WWE, outside of like what you've heard of how they treated CM Punk and all that sort of stuff, like it seems like they treat that stuff like super seriously. Like they don't want to be looked at as the NFL gets looked at as being this concussion company. So it's within their best interest to protect their wrestlers as much as they can, which I think is why you see a very safe product with WWE versus some of the other companies that are out there right now.
Now, the one thing, and we were talking about Bret Hart earlier, I kind of think of Chris Benoit in the same way, strictly because I don't think WWE truly did see him as their champion. Because at the time when he won it, I believe WrestleMania 20, he won it. Look at the people on the roster who could have been champion. John Cena, Triple H, they tried to make Batista into something, and yet they kind of had to give it to him because he was so over. It's kind of like 10 years after that fact with Daniel Bryan. WWE.
Yeah, same. Yeah, it's guys like him and like Eddie Guerrero.
Yep.
Who are not the stereotypical WWE champion. They're not the Brock Lesnar. They're not the Roman Reigns. They're not the John Cena. They're not the Rock. They're these more shorter, stockier, athletic, more maneuver type wrestlers that I think naturally just became over. Like you look at someone like Eddie Guerrero, like you still see him like trend on Twitter every once in a while. It's just because like every once in a while, people, like a whole bunch of people start like, holy fuck, Eddie Guerrero was a really fucking good wrestler. Like a really, really good wrestler. But you didn't see guys like that or guys like Chris Benoit get over until the crowd basically forced the hand of the WWE to say like, okay, we've got to make this guy champion or else we're going to face some consequences and potential viewership or revenue or things like that.
Now, last thing we got to talk about with Chris Benoit, and I know with your affiliation with Jammer Taggart, formerly of Our Lady Peace, I do got to bring up that Our Lady Peace did do his theme song, whatever. And I know for the guys in the band, the Chris Benoit tragedy is something that has scarred them forever. And I don't know if you've ever talked to Jeremy about anything of that.
Never.
But no, it's one of those things. It's tough, right? Like, how do you even bring something like that up?
No. It's a quiet topic.
Yeah, and I can break kayfabe here, given it's a wrestling show. That even when you and I were talking in our DMs, this is the one thing I was kind of hesitant to bring up just because I know your affiliation with those guys.
Yeah.
So, but the fact that you were so
I didn't like it's like they wrote a theme song for a guy or played a theme song for a guy that was a well-revered wrestler, and then one day decided to not be. You can't anticipate those things. You can't plan those things. Like, it just sucks, man. It does suck. It like I feel bad. Like, again, I've never talked to Jared about it, but like I feel bad for the guys if like the association that people make to it. Yeah, it sucks, man.
So, Mike, I'm going to let you take the reins here at number 4. So I'm going to ask, who do you have on this spot?
At my number 4?
Yeah.
So I've got a combo, Edge and Christian. And maybe just because I was an Attitude Era kid. The Brood theme song is like the best wrestling theme song ever. I don't give a shit what anybody says. That theme song is fucking fire. Still is today.
Well, Edge used it, I think, recently. Even WWE.
He uses it as like his alter ego, kind of like what Finn Balor does with the Demon. Edge comes out as like Brood Edge, which I think is such a badass idea too. Because I'll fucking pop every time I hear that song. But I had those two. Individually, they've both done similar but very different work. Edge obviously being the much more decorated WWE champion, but Christian being the much more decorated, like Impact, more, I don't know what, it's just, he had a different flavor to him. He was never going to be as over as Edge, ever. Edge was the bigger guy. He had the look, he had the hair, he had everything. Christian was a little bit smaller, but Christian's a really, really, really good wrestler. But those two as a duo, I think, helped tag team wrestling at a time when it needed it. And that's when you got the Hardys. That's when you got the Dudleys. You had Edge and Christian, the Rock and Sock connection with the Rock and Mankind.
Yeah, or even APA.
Yeah, APA. But it helped like kind of make tag team wrestling more main event-ish. Because if you knew that you were having a match with Edge and Christian versus the Dudleys or versus the Hardys, main event caliber, like every single time. They were reckless wrestlers, but they were really funny. They were very good technical wrestlers. They're very good storytelling. I just thought the reason I had them as high as I did for me was I don't, maybe because they were from close to home. It just felt very natural to have them be a part of my list. I don't know if they're not the best wrestlers in the world by any stretch. They didn't make the biggest impact on wrestling ever, but it's really cool to see two guys kind of come up together, build a name together, stick together, build a career together, but still do very good things independently.
Yeah, and surprisingly, I don't have Edge and Christian on my list, but I know for myself, growing up during that time, Edge and Christian were definitely the tag team that were really great. I was more of a Hardys myself because I love Jeff Hardy. I think Jeff Hardy's still one of these guys that I cannot believe he's walking today. When you watch some of the crazy moves he did, and we talked about earlier when he got speared by Edge. But I think the one thing when I think about Edge was his feud with Matt Hardy, post tag team with Lita, right? And that was a whole thing where you want to talk about something. We're talking about Shawn and Brett. That right there, you got to talk about something that really blurred the lines of okay, what's real and what's not.
I feel so bad for Matt Hardy throughout that whole thing. Like, you got dragged the whole time though. The whole like live sex celebration in the middle of the ring. They basically broke kayfabe and made a storyline out of real life. And there must have been some, like, there's obviously more respect for the business for them all doing it, I think. Like, or they all have a lot of respect for the business to say, like, let's put egos aside and let's just make us. I don't know how Matt did it, honestly. Yeah. But it's like a relationship is being rubbed in your face that hard all the time.
Well, especially something in the ring where Matt could have taken all kinds of liberties with Edge, right? Where
oh my god,
the ref's gonna do? The ref's probably gonna think, okay, is he really hitting him? Is this?
Yeah. There were times I'm sure, like how stiff is he gonna go? Yep. And I'm sure they went stiff on each other, guaranteed. But I think they all seem to have a natural respect for each other now, and obviously enough time has passed, and Edge is married to Beth Phoenix, and Matt's got his whole big Hardy family compound, and like they've all grown up and moved on, which is great. And it's cool to see. Like, I think they did. Remember when the WWE network had like that round table doc or series? I can't, like Table of Five or Table of Four or something like that. Yeah. It was really cool to see them all together after the Hardys came back at WrestleMania 33.
Something like that. I think 33, 34. No, when
they were in Florida when the New Day announced them.
Yeah.
That was so good. 33 or 34.
Yeah, I think it was.
That was awesome.
That so was. I just feel really bad for the Hardys because that run they had recently just, I wouldn't say didn't really go anywhere. And of course, the most recently with Jeff Hardy, where we were doing a house show, and he just like halfway through, he's like, I'm done. I just walked out.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see. I'm sure he'll show up in AEW. Because, like, can you imagine, like, you have a dream match between the Hardys and the Young Bucks or FTR or Lucha Bros or even the Acclaimed. I love the Acclaimed. They're fucking awesome. But you have, like, it's just all these dream scenarios start becoming reality. And I think that is the single best thing about pro wrestling right now. If you're not into WWE, any match is literally a reality that can happen.
It is. It really is. I think for me, the big problem with AEW right now is I think they're cornering themselves the way WCW did back in the day, where you hire all this talent, you hire the best of the best, and it gets to a point, it's like, okay, well, what do we really do with everybody now?
How do you give everyone legitimate time to build a story?
Yeah.
And you can't just do it on Dark. You can't just do it on Elevation because not enough people watch those. And there's not enough carryover from what happens on those on to something like a Dynamite or onto a Rampage. That's I 100% agree. It's like you've got these free agents out there, which is like you got Keith Lee out there. Just like, oh my God, imagine having Keith Lee in AEW right now. Johnny Gargano, like, fuck. Like, you want all these people to come back wrestling and see them more, but you don't necessarily want them in AEW because how do you support that much talent on 5 hours of TV or on 4 hours of TV a week? Or no, 3 hours. Because Rampage is an hour and Dynamite's 2. So, like, I don't know, man. I mean, like, I want these folks to have matches with Punk, with Danielson, with all that. But I don't know how you build a roster with that many people and have that much creative for everyone.
So for my number 4 selection here, Mike, I'm actually going to call an audible because usually I only had 4, but I'm going to add a 5th here.
Okay.
I am going to put Kevin Owens because when I first got back into wrestling in 2015 after my brother passed away, one of the things that I did watching wrestling was I was just really impressed watching Kevin Owens because you see this guy who he looks like a defensive lineman and yet he moves so agile in the ring.
Yep. Yeah. Did you ever watch any of his Ring of Honor stuff or PWG? Watch his stuff as Kevin Steen. It is unbelievable. Like, he's very good in WWE, like very, very good. But he was that much better in Ring of Honor and PWG. Even stuff with like Sami Zayn. Sami Zayn, I think, is his best friend in real life. saying before WWE was El Generico. He wore a luchador mask and all that. The matches those two would have are absolutely out of this world. I thought I was very like Edge and Christian was a swap with Kevin Steen or Kevin Owens. I agree. Kevin, he's a great storyteller. For a guy that's as big as he is, he moves like crazy. He makes other wrestlers look really good. Like really good. Like he's good at just putting a really solid match together. Like you can put him in the ring with, I don't know, a guy like Batista, and then put him in a ring with Rey Mysterio. And he's going to have an absolutely incredible matches with both. He's just that good. So yeah, I would very much have him on there too.
Yeah, and he was a guy that when I was putting this list together, I was like, do I include him? Do I not include him just because of the names on this list? But yeah, Kevin Owens is one of those guys that, while I do think that he at times does put on the same kind of match, but and mostly I think that's might just been WWE and how they overscript everything. But I really think he's a great wrestler. I think his promo skills is one of the things that he really shines at.
He's so good. So good. He's crisp. He's clean. You believe what he's saying. Like he's super good, man. He's such a non-traditional WWE superstar. He's not like a Roman Reigns or a Brock Lesnar or even a Big E, a Lashley, Drew McIntyre. He's got a beer belly.
Yep.
And a big scraggly beard. But he's doing swanton bombs off the top rope. He's doing like moonsaults. He's doing cannonballs. Like, this guy's super agile for what he is.
He's doing stuff that you just look at him and you're like, there's no way that's even possible.
Yeah. And he does it so crisply. Like, it's not like it's done really, really well. So good pick there for sure.
Now we come to number 5, and I know you and I are both going to have him on this list. The Ayatollah of rock and roll, Y2J, yes. Chris Jericho.
Yes, I did. My respect has grown for him more since he debuted in New Japan and AEW. That's where I could see him, because I didn't really pay attention to WWE in the mid 2010s. So like when Owens had a good run, when Finn Balor had a good run, I wasn't really paying too much attention then. So like when he was coming out with Kevin Owens and they were doing the list and like stuff like that, I didn't watch any of that. As soon as he hit New Japan, I was like, holy shit. Like I've never watched New Japan, but Chris Jericho's going to New Japan. That's kind of interesting. I want to see what that's all about. And he comes out like as this completely different character, but it works. And it's just like, okay, like this guy's more than just like the fucking Y2J and the list got like, he's got a lot. It seems like he's got a lot more. Is he as agile in the ring as he used to be? No, but he's like 50 something years old now, but fuck, he can put on a good match and he knows how to build gimmicks and characters for himself. He knows how to get himself over on certain things to create more from it.
Yeah, and that's one of the things I had in my notes too, is that he really does seem like very much a chameleon when it comes to his characters. He's always redeveloping his character. When you saw him in WCW, when he had the giant ass list and, Monday Night Jericho and all that stuff, he comes over to WWE with the Y2J character. But I think a lot of people seem to really gravitated towards his heel run in the late 2000s, where he was kind of like that old country of no men character.
Yeah.
Where he had that kind of talk slowly and softly. He had that kind of thing to him.
Yeah.
And that's cool. I wasn't really watching wrestling at the time, but when I go back and I see some of those clips, it's like Chris Jericho really was that convincing.
Very much so. Very much so. Like he was always kind of looked at as, again, another non-typical Vince McMahon guy. Like he was a cruiserweight in WCW, but got over significantly. I don't think he ever had a main event run in WCW.
No, because I think at the time, it was Goldberg, either Hollywood Hogan or Kevin Nash.
Yeah.
Yeah, it was kind of the same sort of people. And then they put it on DDP, Scott Steiner in the later days of WCW. But
you probably got the cruiserweight and maybe the TV title. but it was crazy. Like maybe it was because of the Attitude Era and the WWE wanting to snatch one of the big guys from WCW. Like he was like shot to the, like he was like strapped to a rocket and shot to the moon as soon as he entered WWE. And it was really cool to see him in WWE, not just be like who he was in WCW, but like, again, like kind of create these characters. Like I could be a really methodical, like asshole, or I could be really obnoxious. There were so many different layers. I mean, you're still seeing it now. Like in AEW, he's got at least 3 or 4 different personas that he'll wear to the ring. And he's in his 50s and he's not slowing down. Actually, well, sorry. I've heard that he will be slowing down. But man, like you don't get guys like Kenny Omega without guys like Chris Jericho, especially because they're both from Winnipeg.
They are.
But yeah, you don't like, there's no, like Kenny Omega is not who he is as a wrestler today without Chris Jericho. And there's a lot of Canadian wrestlers that are not who they are today without Chris Jericho.
Yeah. And it's funny because Jericho's another guy that WWE, I don't think really fully saw him as their champion, but I think that's more because of the roster of talent that they had at the time with the Triple H's, Stone Colds, the Rocks.
Yeah.
I just think he's one of those guys who he made a huge impact for Canadian wrestling. And then of course, when WCW guys started coming over after that, when you saw the Chris Benoit's, the Perry Saturn, Eddie Guerrero, stuff like that, you really saw that it switched where now WWF was like the company to work for and go for. Now, one thing I do want to talk about with Chris Jericho is it's hard to find a guy in wrestling who's such a renaissance man when you really think about it, because the guy's a wrestler. He's the singer for the band Fozzy, uses Judas as his AEW theme, podcasting, multiple published author, and he's an actor.
Yeah.
And he's not bad at it. He's not a bad actor.
No.
That's what's kind of funny.
Yeah. No, he's definitely been able to put himself in all the right directions to maximize like the Chris Jericho content. And I think that like he's always looking, like just kind of like you mentioned, he's always looking to kind of reinvent himself. And so like maybe he has one personality when he's on the podcast versus when he's in Fozzy versus when he's wrestling versus when he writes his books. Like he's kind of like, he's like the Gene Simmons of wrestling.
That's a good way of looking at it, actually.
He kind of puts his thumb on all the right things at the right time.
Yeah, and not everything hits, just like Gene Simmons.
No.
Because I don't know if you watched Jay and Silent Bob Reboot, where he was the leader of the KKK.
No.
It's such a stupid role. Even watching it, the movie wasn't that good, but when I was watching it and Jericho was revealed as, I was like, huh? Chris Jericho? What?
That's weird.
That doesn't make any sense. And he's not funny and he's not good at it.
It doesn't seem like the type of role. Maybe he wanted to do something a little risque. Who knows? Maybe. I think Kevin Smith is a big wrestling fan.
He might be. I know he did some stuff with AEW last year, but other than that.
Yeah, I think he's a big wrestling fan. So
he's a big hockey guy, but I don't know if he's that big into wrestling.
A big Canadian like entertainment guy.
Yeah. Well, I don't know. I can't remember if it was one of his comedy specials or Q&A DVDs. He's talking about when this is after Zach and Miri had flopped to the box office and everybody on the internet shitting on him. So he just locked himself in his office for 2 weeks, got super high, watched every DVD on the shelf that he didn't open. And he watched Hockey of People's History, the CBC miniseries. So he got super high. He's like, right on, man. Beat those Russians. And so he goes out in the hallway, he talks to his wife. He's like, honey, do you know that Wayne Gretzky broke this record at age this? And she's looking at him like, who the fuck's Wayne Gretzky?
That's awesome. That's awesome.
It is. And of course, we got to talk about Jericho really had one of the coolest intros ever. Just the Y2J.
Oh my God.
Countdown to Millennium.
Yeah.
Opening. That was so iconic and it's so cool anytime that I still see it.
Yeah, the jacket, the countdown, the build up to it. So like that was something WWE used to be really good at, was like building up the anticipation for something or someone debuting. And luckily, I think for us back then, the internet wasn't as big as it is now. So like it was a lot harder to find spoilers, whereas like you'll get spoilers like as soon as they happen today. It doesn't matter where you look. So it was like a legit surprise when Jericho showed up. Like, that's crazy. Like, Chris Jericho just came from WCW to WWF. Holy shit. Like, that doesn't happen. Whereas now when you get folks coming and like surprising, other than Adam Cole, I would say at AEW, like everyone knew Danielson was coming. Everyone knew Punk was coming. It just, you don't get those surprise pops anymore, which I wish we still got.
Yeah. And you're absolutely right. The internet really has just, it's taken away a lot of that magic of watching guys and females. I can't really.
Yeah, for sure.
But just people that come into it, like Chris Jericho is a good example. But WWE was great at that back in the day. But the one thing is that just because it has a great opening doesn't mean that it always worked. And I think Taz was a perfect example of that, where Taz had this run where came over from ECW. He was white hot. He comes over and it just kind of happened.
Yeah. I think some wrestlers don't necessarily transition to where you think they're going to go. Like even in AEW now, what's his name? Cage.
Brian Cage.
Yeah. Like, I know he's hurt. He never really made the big splash that people thought when he came over from it, because he was Impact before, I think. And he came over and like it didn't really hit the way that maybe people thought it would.
No, it didn't hit for me anyway.
No, not me either. But yeah, like it just, you're gonna get those scenarios where like Taz is another great example. Taz was super white hot in ECW, could have done anything. Great commentator now too, like an incredible commentator. But his style just didn't work in WWE. Like it just, maybe it was a little too late. I don't know.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, there's so many wrestlers have switched promotions and didn't work. Scott Steiner in WWE is a good example of that.
Yep.
But I understand, like, not everything can be perfect. Not everything can be like a Kurt Angle in Impact, for example, where he goes over and he just takes off where he left off in WWE.
Yep. Jeff Hardy, same thing.
Yeah. Well, if you take a look, that's the match with Sting.
Yes. Yeah, we don't need to talk about that one. But yeah, like you don't see those natural transitions where they kind of left off and just kind of go. Actually, sorry, you're seeing a little bit more now, but it's not always perfect. Yeah, I think the big thing.
Now, the last comment I want to make on Chris Jericho here, and it's something that I've never mentioned on the podcast before, is I play fantasy football with one of the guys I used to work with. And a few years ago, we were at a Super Bowl party. I think it was Super Bowl 50. We were watching the Broncos win the game. And my buddy's dad's there, and we're chit-chatting about wrestling. And he's like, yeah, Matthias' cousin used to be in WWE. And I was like, who's that? He goes, Chris Jericho. I was like, Chris Jericho is his cousin? Like, what? Since when now?
That's insane.
Yeah.
Wow. That's a close relationship, my friend.
Right? I know.
So did you get dirt? Did you get anything good?
Never got any dirt. I don't think he really is close with Chris Jericho at all. I think. Got it. I'm trying to remember how does it work? I think he's related through Jericho's dad on his side of the family. Got it. Yeah.
Wow. Chris Jericho.
Yeah. It's a great way to close out this list, Mike. I'm not going to lie to you, though.
It's a great. So, hey, we have to close off the list with the guy that created the list.
There you go, Mike. So, Mike, again, I can't thank you enough for taking time out of your schedule to do this episode with me this evening. Now, before we head off to the close, where can my listeners find you on social media, and where can they find Bahdcast?
So Bahdcast, anywhere, basically go on any platform and just search for Bahdcast, BAHDCAST. You'll find us on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram. I think we tried something on Reddit, but we haven't done anything there. But definitely Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. You can find me on Twitter at Mike_Bahdcast. You can find my colleague Neil at Neil_Bahdcast. We try to do episodes every Thursday. Sometimes life catches up and we don't, but hopefully this week we should be getting back at it. Yeah, that's where you can find us.
Well, that wraps up this episode of the Gr8Wyte Experience. Just a reminder, you can find the show on Twitter at Gr8WytePod, as well as on YouTube and Spotify. For this episode, I am your host, Taylor Gibson, and I'll see you next time.